can't play music or you can't hear music, boom, you can make music. You're walking along, boom, you know what's going to happen next because you're in control, you're in charge. So I think that's probably the most fundamental benefit to somebody's mental health or well-being that music can bring is control.
Welcome to Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation. We believe in harnessing the power of singing to improve mental health and well-being for children and young people. I'm Baz Chapman, and in this first series I'll be speaking with inspirational singers, music leaders, researchers and other specialists to consider the unique role of singing, songwriting, voice exploration and creative music making in transforming young people's mental health and well-being.
Inspiring Voices, a new podcast from the Sing Up Foundation. Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. And we're just starting to plan season 2. So get in touch with your ideas for future topics or interviews you'd like to hear. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. And now on with the show.
Joining me on the Sing Up Foundation podcast is SK Schlomo, international non-binary beatbox star, former world looping champion, 3 times TEDx speaker, and disability and mental health ambassador. They're also founder of the Beatbox Academy and longtime friend of Sing Up, being as they are very gifted and committed to working with children and young people. Shlomo, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Very good, thank you. Now, a lot of people watching or listening to this podcast will probably look at you and think, wow, that's amazing what you do, but maybe it's not for me. Maybe I haven't got the skills to do it, or certainly, if they're educators, I would never know how to lead that with my students. Is there an easy way into beatboxing?
Yeah, beatboxing is disarmingly easy to get a group of young people or an individual young person doing. Famously, we've made that a challenge with Beatbox Academy since the beginning, that we could get anyone beatboxing within 2 or 3 minutes and doing something really quite convincing. And we do that with the smallest young people all the way to the elders, and just handing them a mic and watching their face as they unleash this crazy bass that they didn't know was in them is really, really, like, it's just, I still get tingles from watching it happen, even though I've seen it happen hundreds of times now. And then, I think in terms of like music leaders wanting to use beatboxing as a tool for teaching, I actually feel like that sort of doubt or resistance that you mentioned there is really fading. Like over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, it's like beatboxing is, I think, in reaction to the fact that so many young people are into it, has become much more part of a day-to-day tool that you can use for teaching beatboxing. You do not have to be a world beatboxing champion to be respected as someone who can show some young people how to do some beatboxing. It's the same as any other kind of musical discipline. Like, you don't have to be the world's best drummer or the world's best pianist and I mean the world's best, you don't have to be world leading to still inspire a young person to explore making music with those tools. So I think don't compare yourself to the world leaders, just compare yourself to yourself a couple of weeks ago, and if you're better at beatboxing than you were then you can show what you've just learned in terms of your progress to the young person.
It's interesting. It makes me think about kind of sometimes singing, as in kind of creating something, I suppose, melodic with your voice, can sometimes be seen as something either which is really exposing because you're somehow you're connecting with your soul a bit more, or there's this sort of fear of kind of always being compared and being afraid to share your singing voice in case it isn't amazing, or in case you don't have a really lovely vibrato, or if you have trouble pitching. So is actually beatboxing a way to perhaps a slightly easier way in? Yeah,
maybe. Like, you don't have to have all those same, that little list of insecurities that we have as singers, which I can super relate to, and it stopped me wanting to sing in public for years, and a lot of work and coaching on me now feeling confident to do that. Like with beatboxing, in a way, you're not exposing something about your voice, like your singing voice is very, like you say, you feel exposed, you feel naked, and it's so characteristic to us as individuals. It kind of feels like a version of our soul. So like to get up and sing in front of a class of kids, like I'd be terrified to do that. I would do it, and I do it, but the beatboxing, I don't know, because it's much more percussive, it's much more rhythm based. I don't know, it doesn't feel less personal, but it feels hopefully a bit more empowering. I think because the thing about beatboxing, right, is anyone who does it with gusto and with spirit, it works. It doesn't have to be technically complex for it to be solid. Like anyone can just drop a they're just plosive vocal sounds that we use in speech every single day. So if you just do that with like confidence and ownership, like actually that's a lot less of a commitment than learning to sing. So I think it probably is easier. I mean, I would say that though, because I've been, I'm a beatboxer. I've been doing it since I was a kid, and I've only really identified as a singer over the last few years. So maybe I would say that. Maybe I'm biased, but yeah, I do think it's easier.
Just tell me about that transition into becoming a singer as well as a beatboxer.
Oh God, well, for me, like I always did sing, as how us unfiltered children, we sing all the time. We don't do it for other people's benefit or to try and be in tune or to be good. We just do it because it feels right, and we sing all the time. So I did, and then, as I'm sure many people share the experience of like scarring things where you sang and someone told you can't sing, or told you you're out of tune, or I remember doing something. I remember in secondary school we were encouraged to. I think each class could host a form assembly every now and then. Your class got a chance to like deliver something that they wanted to say. And I really wanted to do an assembly around mental health. And I wanted to talk about Kurt Cobain as an example of someone who was lost to mental health and suicide, which is mad because I didn't really identify as a mental health campaigner. And I'm realizing this in real time. I didn't identify as someone who campaigned for mental health awareness until like my 30s, but now I think about it, I've been doing it since I was like 14. Anyway, so I really wanted to tell a story in a way that would be accessible, and there was this other assembly that happened the year before where a group of kids performed a song by the Monkees, and I was like, I want to do that. I want to put together a little band and we'll just perform a song. But I couldn't find anyone. I found everyone who wanted to play in the band, apart from no one wanted to be Kurt. No one wanted to sing "When the Lights Out, It's Just Dangerous," understandably. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to have to do it because there's no one else who wants to do it. So I did my best. I sang it. During the sound check, there was someone in the year above who was in the stage lighting and sound team who came over during the rehearsal and was like, do you think maybe it would just work like without the singing? Because I think it's really good, but maybe could we just not do that? And I was like, but that's the whole. So like I was already like wobbling, and then performed it in front of all my peers, and it was not an empowering experience. It just it was a bit of a laughing stock. It didn't do what I wanted it to do, and I learned a lot from that. But I learned a lot from that about like creative failure and creative recovery, but the scar of feeling like I'm not a good enough singer lasted into my 30s, and took a lot of work to undo. And I feel like everyone will have some kind of experience that they can relate to there, where their singing was criticized and they thought that criticism was true.
Yeah, absolutely. And the work of Sing Up is constantly trying to get across that message that singing is something within all of us, and it goes very deep and right back to our origins as a species, and that actually we need to get over that idea of it being a mechanism for judging people, that it's something to be shared and embraced. Just tell me about, I mean, you and I grew up in the same town, or certainly went to school in the same town of High Wycombe, and I don't know whether we had different music education experiences. Certainly, I at Music Centre was learning sort of Western classical instruments. The only singing I did was choral. What was music making like for you?
I feel like I had a really strong music making culture at home, which helped me recognize what I did and didn't like about the education offers that were at school or at High Wycombe Music Centre, which I guess was that like a local authority funded
that's it.
provision for like mostly classical music. But I got given a scholarship there when I can't remember, quite young, and was sort of identified by my primary school as a kid who was like good at music and should be supported. But I just had an awareness of the fact that it was mostly not very cool or not very inspiring, because at home, like I grew up in a Middle Eastern family, so there's like lots and lots of music and singing and like color in my life from childhood. And also my father was and still is a jazz guitarist, and also played in blues bands. So I kind of grew up going to blues festivals and jazz gigs, and I kind of got really into. I'm a drummer. I was born. My first instrument's a drummer, so I started playing jazz with my dad's band and getting paid for it from like my early teens. So I guess I kind of had this. Yeah, I kind of had this attitude with the school provision and even the kind of music center provision, that like I'd show up for the bits that I felt added value, but I was aware that a lot of it just wasn't right. So like music lessons at secondary school, the music teacher just didn't even bother. He was just like, okay, this kid needs to just go into there's like a little studio with some better gear in it. And I was just left there to make my own music. So I'd just go and like write songs whilst all the other kids were learning like the kind of basics of music that I'd already knew. So I just felt like there wasn't much happening there. But there were some really wonderful moments. For example, like when I was a little bit older, I remember going to that same head of music and saying, look, I want to start a percussion group at this school, because I by that point I've always been a little bit of a hustler and an entrepreneur. I had a little bit of a side hustle teaching the younger kids drums, just because my friends' younger siblings would have told their parents that they knew a good drummer. So I had like, in the same school, I was probably teaching 5 or 6 of those younger kids how to drum. And I was like, look, if I just get all my students, some of my friends, I want to put together a sort of samba school stomp style kind of percussion experience. And the head of music was like, oh, you've timed this really well, because we need to spend our instrument budget by next week, and we haven't done. And if we don't spend it, we lose it. Here's the catalogue. What do you need? And I was like, are you mad? So I was like, right, I'm getting some timbales. I want some congas. I want some this and that. So that, like, things like that, just like I learned a lot from that too, about like having a bit of initiative and, like making things happen. I learned a lot from that about you can make stuff happen. But in terms of like, I feel I'm quite privileged in that I've always felt like I have these visions, whether I like it or not. I just know there's these things I really want to do. But I don't know, for someone who was sort of less, inclined naturally to go and make stuff happen, if there's probably loads of incredible musicians that didn't really get those opportunities.
Well, certainly, it sounds like your approach overall kind of didn't quite fit. So
story of my life.
Well, I was going to say, does that correlate with you in general in your kind of school years?
Absolutely. I mean, I got diagnosed with severe ADHD like about 3 years ago. So I was struggling through school with undiagnosed ADHD. So and like part of the process of getting diagnosed, I had to ask my mum if she had any like report cards from school, and they're all the same. They're all like, this kid is really sweet and means really well, but just can't help causing absolute chaos and disruption. And it's so heartbreaking to read, because and that goes all the way back to primary school. Even the one music teacher at primary school, the one who put me up for the audition for the scholarship and the one who really believed in me, wrote those same words. So it's like, who I only had sweetest of memories of, so it was kind of heartbreaking to realize that I'd made her life really, really hard unintentionally. But it does make more sense now as to why I've always had this feeling that I just don't fit the mold. And that's been, through school, but even through like then becoming like part of the music industry. Like I left home, I got straight into performing beatboxing because at the time, like, no one was doing it. And I started touring with a hip hop band, and within a couple of years, like, I'd got a slot performing on Jules Holland on BBC Two, and like, famously, if an unheard of artist gets to do like a little solo slot there, then their whole world explodes, which had happened to people before me, like Katie Tunstall, various other people, and it happened. You know, my whole world exploded. I had like a bidding war from all these different like managements and labels and stuff, and I was like, oh my god, it's happening. I started getting solo shows booked in at big festivals, and I was like, great, it's happening. But quite quickly, I realized that these big kind of organizations, they have a system. They have like a model that they find an act, and they develop the act, they get the act signed to EMI or whatever, they release the single, they release the album, they play on whatever Top of the Pops had turned into, and then they go on the world tour. And I was like, yeah, but that sounds boring. I want to like host the World Beatboxing Convention, and I want to create like a whole choir of like wacky vocalists, and I want to do the same stupid ideas as what I was proposing to my head of music at school, and like, you know, and that just doesn't fit with those, let's be honest, money-oriented industrial vehicles. So again, I had to like step outside of the traditional role of being a music star, and I ended up having to define my own path, which, you know, is great, but definitely divergent.
Yeah, so there's a really weird sort of interrelationship between it sounds like music as being something that is very much part of you and is a way of expressing yourself, and maybe to a degree of understanding yourself and your relationship with the world. But also it's the thing that in a way has defined the way the world views you.
Yeah.
And so is it sometimes a love-hate relationship with music?
Oh God, absolutely. Because I'll tell you why, and it's really heartbreaking to really dig into why. Like, like I said, I grew up in a Middle Eastern family. So like, my family were they'd speak Arabic and Hebrew and English in one sentence. Like, it was a really kind of rich and colourful and loving world that I was in before I got to school. But when I got to school, it was really awful to realize that that wasn't normal. Like, these white kids speak English, and they don't have a foreign name like Shlomo. They don't have, like, you know, their family have the same color skin, and like, so basically come across racism and to not feel like, you know, to feel like an outsider from such an early age, 4 or 5 years old. And I then basically realized pretty quickly that I could pass as white because I've got the palest skin in my family. Like, my cousins and other members of my family will receive racial abuse in public, which I have the privilege of I got to skip all that. And as long as I don't tell anyone I've got a foreign name, I started using a white name. I basically just learned to mask who I was from a very early age. But that comes with all kinds of costs. You know, you're hiding yourself, and that's not good for you, not good for your spirit. Until I started doing music, and I mentioned earlier the primary school teacher who noticed me and pushed me to do this audition. She noticed me from a super early age, sort of like 7 or 8 years old, and started pushing me to achieve with drumming. And she made me do a concert. She made me do a drum solo at the school concert, which was sort of like my first ever taste of acceptance at school, because it went from, you know, me feeling like I needed to hide myself so I wouldn't get bullied for being foreign or being weird or not fitting the mold in the ways that we discussed, to the next day, everyone wanted to sit next to me, and everyone knew my name. Everyone was going on about how they knew me, and I was a bit like, okay, cool. This is the way to succeed in a white world or a neurotypical world. I didn't have that language at the time, but I was like, all I have to do is be a star, which is simultaneously wonderful and inspiring and enriching and empowering. And at the same time, it's almost a lethal diagnosis of, like, I became basically obsessed with succeeding and being accepted through talent. which is not sustainable. And that kind of race to always be the best and always be good enough through achievement continued until like I had a really like awful and life-threatening mental health episode in my early 30s. So this drive, this kind of obsession with being the world's best, carried on for 20 something years after that happened, and almost wiped me out completely. Definitely decimated my life in terms of like I missed all my friends and all my cousins' weddings. I missed a lot of my kids' lives because I was too busy trying to prove to the world that I was good. So I was out on the road, and on the outside I was a megastar, but on the inside I was just getting more and more empty and having less and less to sort of keep running my engine on. So yeah, you've described it really well as a double-edged sword in terms of like balancing the power of finding your talent with the danger of letting that define your worth. Dangerous stuff, Baz.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is really interesting because when we look at singing for mental health and well-being, we're moving into a space that can be exploring some parts of a young person's experience that they maybe haven't explored in any other way, and of course that can go in different directions. It can be incredibly positive. It can be something that helps to transform them. It can also be something where, if it's not sort of carefully managed and that young person isn't in a safe place, that can be pretty bad, potentially catastrophic. So just before we dive into that too much, just overall, what would you say are the mental health benefits of doing musical work with your voice?
Oh wow, the mental health benefits of exploring what you can do with your voice are immeasurable. So like if you have, well, I'll go back to my own experience, right? So throughout this story of someone who felt like they didn't fit in, someone who felt like they mustn't let anyone know who they really are because they'll get bullied or they'll be victims of bigotry, and also someone who was struggling with undiagnosed anxiety and undiagnosed ADHD, I found the need to have music around me as a coping mechanism, and I still do. Like I'm much more open with it now. Like if we're out for a walk, I need to have my headphones on. I need to have music going, and now I'm much more able to just say to people, "Oh, I'm autistic, and this is just one of my needs," and everyone's cool with it. But yeah, music is just something that helps my brain cope. And because I know what's going to happen next, when there's a rhythm going, when there's a beat going, there's one thing that is predictable and understandable for me in a world that is continually confusing and unpredictable. And for someone with anxiety, that's hard. So having something you can control, beautiful. So then that's why beatboxing was important to me. This is all theory I've come up with as an adult, but as a child I didn't know this. But the reason I was beatboxing, I think, was because, if you can't play music or you can't hear music, boom, you can make music. You're walking along, boom, you know what's going to happen next because you're in control, you're in charge. So I think that's probably the most fundamental benefit to somebody's mental health or well-being that music can bring is control, and not in a sort of unhealthy, panicky, controlling way, but in a way that you can give a human being agency over what they say, how they say it, and what's going to happen next with some very, very simple tools. So we know this. People listening to this have been teaching singing for a while. They know, they've seen how someone can transform once they're given a voice, once they're given a platform. So I think that's the main one, is giving someone that sense of like control over their own safety and their own actions. But there's so much more, because to be safe and to be well, we need a sense of identity. We need to know who we are and why we're here and what we're doing and what this is all about. And I think a lot of the challenges we face when we're struggling with mental health is those bigger questions. Like, I don't feel good enough. I don't feel worthy. I don't have the energy to go out into that world. I'm just going to keep hiding here, and I'm going to become more and more isolated until I've convinced myself that the world will be better without me. And that's when it becomes life-threatening. So those are all identity questions, and music and creativity in general give us a space to explore who we are, because you can think about it as much as you want, or someone else can describe your identity as much as they want. But for you to just explore it, you're not using like your thinking brain. You're just singing, or you're just writing a song, or you're just playing the drums or whatever. Like you don't have to choose. It just presents itself, like who you are, who your identity is. And the more like safe spaces we have to explore that, and I don't know, we're doing this. The show is this sort of big project we're touring at the moment. It's called Breathe, which is a solo show I made, which tells the whole story I've just told you. And then we've been developing this young people's project alongside it called Breathe Academy for young people aged 12 to 25. And the goal is to fight suicide in young people. And the sessions have been so beautiful, where we've been creating a space. So yes, come and see me doing my beatboxing and my live looping and my storytelling. And yes, I will teach you all the tools I know. But more importantly, I want this to be about you as a young person. What is your story? What do you want to say? And how can I help you to tell that story? What creative tools can we teach you to do that? And the number of young people who have come to these sessions and have shared stuff and said, I've never told anyone about this, but I'm queer, or I've never told anyone this, but none of my friends know that I take medicine for ADHD, or the number of young people who've come into the space and said, I've just realized that the person next to me, with both of our families are going through divorce, or whatever. Like, just a space to just be safe and just be real, and not have to be the best at anything at all, not have to be impressive to anyone. You're just making music, you're just doing your thing. It's life-changing, I swear. So that's quite a long answer, but I think there are a lot of ways that like music and creativity in general will benefit people's mental health, especially in young people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose beatboxing is one of those things, and actually a lot of the musical disciplines that you use, like looping as well, they're quite individual things. They take a long time to build up. Same with any kind of instrument, you've got to put in your 10,000 hours or whatever it is to master it. We know that there's this additional thing about making music in groups, and this quite human thing of, say, singing with other people. It's good for a reason. There's something about the way it connects us. And although you've got that kind of, I suppose, what's the word? Quite internal way of doing things yourself, you're quite a collaborator as well, and you seem to celebrate people making music together. So is that really sort of how things have unfolded for you? Because you did mention right at the beginning, you wanted to get people together and have crazy ideas about bringing people together to make music.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I really do love doing solo shows, but it's not my heart. At heart, I'm a band leader or an ensemble leader or an instigator or a catalyst, because there's something so irreplaceable about the sensation of celebrating someone else's talent to people who don't even know it. I love that feeling of, oh my god, you don't even know how badass this young person is, or what this collective of beatboxers and singers could do together. Or, like you say, right back at the beginning of the story, when I was trying to create a percussion group at school. That was by no means my first ever musical group. Like, I remember I started a band called Bin Bashers with all the kids on my street after I watched Stomp perform on Blue Peter. And I was like, right, come on, let's get all of the wheelie bins and all of the metal bins and let's start drumming. And like, that band lasted about 15 minutes before people were shouting out their windows, you kids, shut up. And I was like, so like, I don't know, it's such a pleasure to like facilitate group connection, and also to celebrate that, to say, make some noise for this. Like, you can't do that in a solo show. I do. I'm not ashamed to be like, come on, make some noise for me, celebrate me. I can see I'm badass, but not on the same level that I can for someone else.
Yeah, brilliant. And I know certainly your shows that you do with young people, they're really kind of involving. It's not just you stood on stage.
Oh God, no! It's like the whole ethos behind Breathe Academy and its predecessor Beatbox Academy was everything has to be co-designed with and for the young people. Like, we don't say, right, here's what you're going to learn. You need to learn these. And I think like that probably, the first question you asked me about how I found my school education, music education. I think the main thing I realized that I think other people might not have realized who were going through that same system was at school and at music center, it was all about dots on a piece of paper. They would like give a child a clarinet and some dots, and that was how you learnt music. But I think I already knew that was one way of doing it, but it's really not the way in at all. And I think through all the work I've done with young people, I've always wanted to say, what do you want to do? And if you don't even know what you want to do, let me show you some things I do, and let me ask you some questions that can get you started. And then it doesn't take much to get a group of young people, or even one young person, to just watch their brain start doing somersaults into what the possibilities could be. It's just a really delicious feeling.
Yeah. So that process of creativity is going to speak to you, I suppose, in a similar way that there are pieces of music that always speak to us, and it's one of the brilliant things about, well, certainly in this day and age, we have access to such a unlimited range of music. So probably the chances are we're always going to find something that we can relate to. But I suppose what you're talking about is something that then goes, actually, well, having known all that, having heard all of that, what about you? What can you say that makes it work for you in a way that is completely unique? I mean, artistic expression obviously comes in many forms, but it feels to me like singing and vocalizing are one of the ways that are probably the most personal way of actually expressing how you feel.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing if you're thinking of ways to like improve educational offerings, I think the most important thing is role models and inspiration. So like I think the reason why I knew that there was more to what they were saying music was all about when I got to school is because I'd already had that, like being a kid, going to these like wild belly dancing parties aged 3 or 4 years old. My grandfather would play the dumbug, like a Middle Eastern hand drum, in the band, and he'd sit there just glowing, just playing this drum. And I remember just being like, oh, I want to be like him. And he'd let me do it. And like, I don't know, I had that role model. And I think that's why I wasn't afraid to challenge, the status quo in terms of like what music can be. And I think that might have been what was lacking in those sort of typical Western music lessons. It's like a piece of paper and a clarinet, great, but you also need the inspiration. You need that person that the young person can look up to and say, I want to be like them. And it's also really important that that person matches their identity, like, especially for people who, like myself, who are from foreign families, or, so you need people who look like you, and who you need role models who, if you're queer or if you're disabled or if you have a different body shape to other people, you need that representation. So I think that's really important if you're a music teacher, to make yourself a bit more vulnerable to those young people and say, look, this is my journey with music. This is why I'm here teaching you right now, because music is a big part of my life. And these are the people who inspired me. So it creates this kind of network, this kind of like map of your identity. Like for me, I used to watch Michael Jackson on TV, but these days, young people have got so much access to inspiration through the internet and through social media and through YouTube and TikTok and everywhere else. So ask those young people who they want to be like, find out who their role models are. And if they're struggling to give you some, you can show them who inspires you. Like, yeah, please don't just dictate what they should learn, because that breaks my heart.
Yeah, sure. So any other pointers, I suppose, to anyone who wants to start leading activities in this world, start introducing young people to the world of beatboxing?
Well, if you want to start introducing young people to the world of beatboxing, you could definitely learn some beatbox skills of yourself very, very quickly, and there's a lot of resources for that online, and I think also through SingUp. Yeah. But equally, you don't have to do that. You can show them, if you've enjoyed beatboxing, either you've been to watch a show or you've seen video clips or both. Like, you can show the young people what beatboxing is without you having to do it. You can show them it online, or you can take them to come and watch my show or another beatboxer show, and you can start asking them like if that's something they want to learn. Yeah, I think keeping it really, really focused on the young person or the young people and their identities, their stories, and bringing your story into it. So if it isn't something that you already do, either you could go and do some learning, or you could explain to those young people like who you are as a musician and why you think beatboxing would be interesting. so that you don't have to feel like an imposter that way around. You don't have to be like, oh, I'm no good at this. How can I teach them? Doesn't matter. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to care. You just have to be passionate. You're teaching them about passion, not about like things like technique, secondary to passion, if you ask me.
Yeah. It's so interesting, you know, two people who grew up in the same town with such kind of different journeys. I mean, mine was very dots based,
Right.
very much learning instruments. I also got a scholarship at the music centre.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. It feels like a long time ago now. I remember picking out microtones on a violin and having to say whether it was sharp or flat. And actually, there were aspects of that really did work for me, that I absolutely loved, and I got to a point in adult life where I was singing it and playing at a reasonably high level. But equally, I remember in sort of mid-teens realizing that actually outside of those dots was a whole other world of really fascinating stuff, which now feels like it's sort of come full circle as I write and arrange and work probably more than anything with non-auditioned choirs and allowing people to connect with their voice in a way that can be either just good for their well-being or truly transformational in terms of their health and their lives. And so, I sort of feel like I've connected with you at the point at which we go, actually, this thing of making music together is just awesome. And in a way, it sort of doesn't matter how you do it, as long as it works for you and it speaks to who you are and is not, and is celebrating whoever you are. And that just means that music's going to get more and more exciting, I think. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. It's great, and the fact that the system is evolving all the time. Young people can do beatboxing for their GCSE. You know, it's becoming more and more diverse, more and more open, and more young person centered. It's wonderful, because I swear a lot of my friends are great musicians, but the system made them believe that they weren't. And hopefully that will happen less and less, and we'll get more and more empowered voices. Where it's not about being the world's best. I've been doing a lot of work with the choir with no name. Do you know who that is?
Oh, yeah.
For anyone listening who doesn't know, it's this incredible charity that support people affected by homelessness. I think they're in like 6 or 7 different cities now, where anyone can show up once a week. They get a meal, they get a place safe out of the cold for the evening. But more importantly, they sing together. And the shows I've been doing with them, honestly, like, it's so beautiful, because the singing, it's really not about whether you're in tune. It's really not about whether, it's nothing to do with how technically good you are at singing, because you're there, you're alive, you're here, and we're together. And I couldn't care less about the technique. It's like you just said earlier, it's changing lives. It's transformational. So we need more of that. Making music because we love it, not because we're trying to be good.
So, my final question to you then, Shlo, an inspiring vocal moment from some point in your life, some moment at which the process of doing something vocal was just for you.
Well, oh my gosh, I've got so many options of what I could say to you. Moments from the process of doing something vocal. I feel like I could tell you one which is a bit more lighthearted and one which is a bit more life-changing. Which do you want?
Both.
The lighthearted one was that when my friends heard me beatbox and realised that I had this talent, they started using it as a way to get free food. So they'd go into the chip shop and they'd be like, look, if our friend can blow your mind, can we all please have chips for free? And then they bring me out and I start beatboxing, and a few times it worked. So that's the lighthearted one. And the life-changing one, I think, would be there's so many, but one time I was invited to be part of this process that was happening at Glastonbury Festival called Africa Express, which was a project that Damon Albarn founded, where he gathered together all of his rock star friends from the West to collaborate and jam with superstar African musicians for a 2-hour stage takeover at Glastonbury. And I was backstage at this event and I felt like such a fool because I didn't know anyone. There were just like A-list people all around the place, and I nearly left. But I summoned up some courage and I went up to Damon and I said, "Hi Damon, my name's Shlomo. I'm a beatboxer." And he went, I know who you are. Do you know who that is? And I was like, yeah, that's Jerry out of the Specials. He said, yeah. Do you know the Specials? Do you know a song called A Message to You, Rudy? I was like, that was like one of my favourite childhood songs of all time. He was like, oh, well, I'm about to perform it with the Specials. Do you want to be the drummer? I was like, okay. And then we went and performed it at Glastonbury. And that was a pivotal moment for me as well. Like, so much stuff happened off the back of that 1 3-minute performance. So.
Oh, and that's proper rock and roll as well. I mean, there's no record company telling you, you've got to sign something before you do it. You just go on and make a noise.
It's just an invitation. Dream come true.
Fantastic. Well, we must draw it to a close, though. But thank you so much. It's so interesting. Certainly hearing about your journey, but your observations on the value of this work and the fact that it's something that anyone involved in looking after young people can get involved with, and the benefits can just be amazing. So all credit to you, and all power to your continuing work, and long may you continue to inspire people with whatever you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the support and the kind words and all the amazing work you guys are doing at Sing Up Foundation. It's awesome. Big fan.
This is Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation. Join us for the rest of the series on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and other major platforms. You can also watch the video of each episode on the Sing Up Foundation YouTube channel.
Inspiring Voices, a new podcast from the Sing Up Foundation. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. Season 1 of Inspiring Voices was funded as part of the cultural recovery funding that Sing Up and the Sing Up Foundation received. Thanks to Arts Council England for their support.